Now here's an on-field example. In order to get the ball, the red player turns around because the blue player has dispossessed herself of the ball. The red player didn't impede the blue player in order for her to give up the ball. It was the blue player's action herself that released the ball from her own possession. The red player simply turned and gained possession of the ball. And if anything, the blue player could be penalized for the physical contact.
I think that is a bizarre interpretation of the wording of the rule, and as we are talking about the rule, let's have a look at the rule. I've set this out in the order in which the action occurred as near as I can. It doesn't really matter if the obstruction rule is not set out in the order it is given in the book, because it is not lettered or numbered. Players must not obstruct an opponent who is attempting to play the ball. That gives us two things we need to define: obstruct and attempting to play the ball. A player who runs in front of or blocks an opponent to stop them legitimately playing or attempting to play at the ball is obstructing. And as it says in the rule book, this can also be third-party obstruction. A player with the ball is permitted to move off with it in any direction except bodily into an opponent, or into a position between the ball and an opponent who is within playing distance of the ball and attempting to play it. Players obstruct if they shield the ball from, and I prefer to put prevent there, a legitimate tackle with their stick or any part of their body, or back into an opponent. I interpret back in as meaning backing into the playing reach of an opponent who is in a balanced position, that is, not reaching or moving in a direction that would prevent them playing at the ball. I make this distinction between back into an opponent and move bodily into the position of bodily into an opponent, because both are presented within the rule. The parts I have added in script to the rule there are of course my own interpretations and have no authority whatsoever. Rules and interpretations have to be made by the full FIH Rules Committee and receive the approval of the FIH Executive before they can become rule. Let's take another look at the action and slow it down a bit so I can speak over it. The GP player runs back to challenge the US player for the ball. US player cuts inside her. As the GP player opens out to her left, the US player shoves the ball between her legs. GP player then turns round between the US player and the ball and collects the ball. No problem so far. The problem arises from what she does next. She stops, takes a step back into the American player, which is moving bodily into and is obstruction, and then she eludes the tackle and makes her way downfield. Had she turned and simply collected the ball and moved away from the American player, instead of propping and then moving into her and turning past her, then everything would have been fine. As it was, she committed an obstruction offence. My personal opinions being without authority, let's look at some coaching on the obstruction rule from authority. This is from the FIH Umpires Committee and was produced via dartfish.com. Fortunately, It has now been taken down. I say fortunately because the interpretation of the action given seems to be based entirely on the decision the umpire made at the time and not on the rules of hockey. The action begins with what I think of as a suicide pass from central defence to left defence. It was the opinion of whoever provided this interpretation that this was not obstruction because the Argentinian player had made no attempt to play at the ball. Having turned to position between the Argentinian player and the ball, the German player steps over the stick of the Argentinian player as she approaches the ball to block her path to it and to prevent an active attempt by the Argentinian player to reach and play at the ball. This is obstruction. A second attempt by the Argentinian player to play at the ball is blocked by the German player sidestepping to her right to prevent a tackle while shielding the ball from the Argentinian player, who was certainly within playing distance of the ball at this time and trying to play at it. This is obstruction. As the German player turned back to face the Argentinian player dropped her stick to the ground to make a horizontal block. Ignoring all the previous action, this seems to have been what the interpretation of no obstruction was based upon. This second FIH umpiring committee coaching video is about third party, so first some terminology. A third party player is a teammate of the player in possession of the ball who is the first party. The second party is an opponent who is trying to position to challenge the first party for the ball. That is an opponent who is attempting to position to tackle the ball holder. It is illegal for a third party player to actively interfere with the free movement of a second party player towards the first party player. That is, to move to prevent an opponent from moving to tackle a teammate who is in possession of the ball. This is interference or third party obstruction. The match umpire did not penalise this obstruction, and the interpretation put out with this video by the FIH umpiring committee was that this was not obstruction because the Argentinian player made no attempt to play at the ball. Here is another form of third-party obstruction, but this time the aim is to stop an outrunning defender at a penalty corner from intercepting a shot and from blocking getting to the shooter in the first instance. There is also sight blocking of the goalkeeper as the in-running attacker crosses the path of the shooter. Here is a third example from the FIH umpiring committee. Here there is a New Zealand defender in his own 23-metre area facing the opponent's goal. A South African player approaches from behind his position, puts a stick through his legs and then walks round to the front of him, keeping the stick in position, thereby impeding and making physical contact with the New Zealand player. Whoever interpreted the action for dartfish saw this as an obstruction by the New Zealand player, which of course is an impossibility. But that was the decision the match umpire apparently made. It seemed to be one of the principles of whoever produced the dartfish videos to never contradict this decision that had been made by a match umpire. Match commentators seem to follow the same sort of principle.